Well, so far, we're in Daniel chapter 2. We're going to be down in verses 24 to the end of the chapter, so we're going to try to cover a lot of ground this morning. We may not look at every verse with the same particularity as others, and not definitely in the same way that we do when we're going through, say, Ephesians or a gospel parable or something. All right, we're going to take the primary principles of this text. We're going to look at them together this morning. We're going to look at Daniel 2, chapter 2, verses 24 down through 49, I believe is what it is at the end of the chapter, 49. Just to get us back on context, what we've seen so far in our study of the book of Daniel, above all things, right, the theme of the book is that God is what? Sovereign. You got it. All right. You're getting it. Had my math teacher in high school. All right. She'd tell us something and then get it. We'd say, get it. She said, got it. Got it. Good. Good. Okay. So you're getting it. Get it? All right. Never mind. All right. Okay. That God is sovereign. That he's a sovereign God. And what that means is that, as we see in the book of Isaiah, where God says God has decreed the end from the beginning. He doesn't just know all possibilities, but he has decreed the end from the beginning and therefore knows everything, okay? That he has the power to do what he's decreed and that no hand, no one, nothing can stop his hand from carrying out that which he has sovereignly decreed will happen, all right? That is the sovereignty of God. And that's a great comfort to God's people, right? You find Daniel here in this book, young man of the nation of Israel, a nation that God has chosen from the nations to be a kingdom, a priest, and a holy nation before him. And yet for some reason, which Daniel, well, we know, not just for some reason, but for the reason that the nation has rejected and rebelled, rejected God and rebelled against God, God has given them over in his sovereignty, chapter 1, verse 2, to Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon. And Daniel finds himself now in exile in a foreign land, right? This is a position that we can identify with, but you never find Daniel anxious, fearful, right? He's not shaking in his boots. He's not casting about. He's resting even in this difficult, trying circumstance under the hand of God that he knows to be sovereign. And he knows there's a promise, not just the promise of Messiah to come, but the promise made to this nation that in 70 years, this captivity will end. And so God has said, this is where you will be. And so he's going to follow God where God has put him. And God's people then, finding themselves in a foreign land and a foreign culture, right, where God's sovereignty is not acknowledged, they find opposition to God's sovereignty. And they find an active opposition towards God's sovereignty in their lives from the culture they live in. And so we've watched their identity try to be changed. We've watched their loyalties attempt to be compromised. We've watched them attempt to be conformed to the culture. And yet we're watching Daniel and his friends stand within the culture. They're not wholly separating themselves out from the culture, but they're also not accommodating to the culture. They're not conforming to the culture. They're standing in the midst of the culture, a distinctive people of God. And so they have the opportunity then to be present, to speak into what today we call the public square. Have y'all heard that term used? All right, the public square, the space where the debate is taking place, where questions are being asked and where they are being answered, right? That gets us through chapter 1. Last week at the beginning of chapter 2, then we said, what are the questions? What are the weighty questions that are asked all the time? And what in particular was the weighty question that Nebuchadnezzar was asking? Nebuchadnezzar laid himself to bed one night, and his mind was on the future. And so the weighty question is, what does the future hold, and how does that affect me? How does that affect what I've built? How does that affect what I love? That's a question that we can identify with, right? And his diviners, that God gives him a dream. He doesn't remember all of the dream, it appears. He goes to his diviners and his wise men, his counselors, and tells them, you got to tell me the dream and its interpretation, and they can't. And so there's a death sentence passed down upon them, and that loops Daniel into the issue. Daniel goes to the king and says, King, give me time. I'll go find the meaning of the dream, and I'll bring it to you, God willing. And so he goes away and he gets his friends to pray, and they spend the night, and God gives revelation. And there, just before 24 and 20 through 23, we see Daniel praising, blessing the God of heaven, who is sovereign over everything. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and epochs. He's sovereign over kings and kingdoms. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. He's the one who holds the mysteries and therefore is able to reveal the profound and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and because the light dwells with him. He's a faithful God. He's the God of my fathers. And I give thanks and praise to him, because you've given me wisdom and power and made known to me what was requested of you. Right? And so now Daniel, having the revelation, is ready to go back to the king. Do we have anything? So the weighty question the first half of the chapter was, what's in the future and how does it affect me? Right? And last week we focused on, can you have the answer? Yes, you can. Where do you go to get the answer? You go to the King of Heaven, who holds the mysteries, who is the giver of all revelation and truth. You go to him, you approach his throne, you go to his word, and you seek his wisdom. Right? So, having gone to his throne, having received wisdom from him, does Daniel have some things to say now? Yes, he does. Can you have some things to say when people say, is there a future? What's going to happen in the future? Do you know everything about the future? No. Did Daniel know everything about the future? We'll find out. No. He knows broad generalities, right? And in some sense, that's what we know. We know some specifics, but we don't know exactly how it's all going to get there, do we? All right? That's why we say that the return of Jesus Christ is what? It's imminent. It could happen at any moment, at any time. And Scripture says, you be ready for his return, okay? We know he's coming. There's some things we know. We don't know it all. But what we know, we tell, all right? So let's look at Daniel. Let's look at Daniel. Verse 24, Daniel has the truth. You have the truth. Now be honest, some of you just thought of a few good men, didn't you? Remember that? Okay, see, I saw some shaking heads. Yeah, it's just one of those lines, isn't it? I tried to work with this morning, see if I can make that fit, but I just couldn't figure out if Nebuchadnezzar was Jack Nicholson or Tom Cruise. You know, I didn't know which way to play it, you know. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. You know, I just didn't have enough time to work on that one. But you have the truth, okay? All right, you have the truth, and that's something that you have to start with this morning. God has made some revelation known. Daniel has had the dream, the import of the dream revealed to him. He has the truth, right? We now have the revelation of God. God has in many ways and many times in the past spoken in many ways to many men, but now he speaks through his Son. And we have the Bible cover to cover, and there is a lot there, and we know truth. All right, you have the truth, but this truth is not ever meant to make you haughty, right? Prideful, okay? It's not meant to make you a theological bludgeon, all right? That's not what it's for. So watch Daniel. He's got the truth, but he doesn't become that man, okay? So Daniel verse 24 goes to Arioch, who's the leader of the kings. He's the king's commander, maybe the commander of his guard. He's the one the king had appointed to destroy the wise men, and Daniel goes to him and says, don't destroy the wise men. Take me to the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. Arioch hurriedly brings Daniel to the king's presence. Now, there's a lot that's made of this. We don't know. You know, is this Arioch going, I better get him in front of the king, so I'm the one that gets him there first, so I get the reward for having found the guy that has the answer? All right, we don't know. It seems like maybe Arioch is maybe currying some favor with Nebuchadnezzar. All right, this, as you walk through the book of Daniel, you remember how much infighting and backbiting, right, and things go on, and how people are trying to remove Daniel from the position that he's about to find himself in, right? People are always looking to undermine somebody so they fall, so their position can be raised. So maybe that's what's going on with Arioch. But he goes to the king and he says, I have found a man. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. All right. And so I wanted to key in on that there first. I found a man. I found a man. This is God's design, right? That God has made his word known. Who does he make his word known? All through the Bible. Who's he make it known to? To men, right? He makes it known to men. For what purpose? That they would tell other men, all right? So Arioch has found a man, all right, who knows the truth of God. And so it's important for us, not just what we know, right? But it's important then how we live, our holiness. It's important how we worship. All of this becomes a complete package as we are the men, right? General usage, by that we mean mankind, men and women, right? As we all are the ones that God gives revelation to give to other men. And it's important that just as we've seen Daniel throughout the first chapter and a half of this book, that we understand the sovereignty of God, that we're full of the knowledge and the wisdom of God, that the knowledge and wisdom of God impacts and affects our life, right? There's no division between the academy and those guys at the seminaries and those pastors in the pulpits, right? And Joe Smith and Diane Summer in the pew, right? Okay? All right, there's no difference between what is known and what is lived. I love 1 Timothy 1:5. The goal of our instruction is love. Knowledge lived out. Orthodoxy, and then what we call orthopraxy. Right understanding becomes right living. Okay? Daniel has modeled that throughout this book so far. He's a man, but he's a man that God has deigned in his wisdom to use to bring his revelation even to kings. Right? When you think of that, don't you get a little echo? Book of Mark, chapter 13, verse 9, that be on your guard. Right? Guard yourself. This is where the apostles are there Jesus is just about to go to Gethsemane, and he's just about to go to the cross, and he's telling them, be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils. You'll be beaten in synagogues. You'll be before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them. You just never know when the opportunity will arise, and you never know who it'll be in front of. That it can be in front of kings, that it can be in front of governors, that it can be in front of your town's mayor. It could be your boss at work, the CEO, CFO of your company, right? You never know. Spent a couple of years in the Middle East out of college, and while we were there was a group of men that came through, and they weren't directly associated or affiliated with us, but they came through, and we connected with them and tried to give them an idea of kind of the lay of the land. They were there to do a lot of just prayer walking through the area. And so they went on down from where we were in Ramallah, which is the West Bank part of Israel, and they went on down to Gaza to do some prayer walking. And while they were down there, they met a guy on the street, and they got to talking to that guy. And before they knew it, they were in guess whose office? He was still alive then. Yasser Arafat. Before they knew it. Walked through a couple of doors. They got no idea where they're going. They don't speak the lingo. And he's right there in all his turbaned glory behind his desk. They're right in his office. And they get to talk with him for a few minutes. Asked him if they could pray with him. He said yes. And they prayed over him. They prayed the gospel for him. And then they went on their way. You never know how, when, where, why you'll end up in the presence of those that are in power and have influence in our nation and in our communities, right? And where you live and where you work. You never know when that'll happen. And so here's Daniel, a man given a revelation by God, who's going to go stand before the king. Arioch's going in there and saying, hey, I found the man, but I found a Jewish man. He says, I found a Jewish man. I found a man among the exiles from Judah. That's significant, right? Because he's not a Babylonian man. He's not a noble. He's not one of the wise men. He's one of the exiles, right? He's a low man. He's an ignoble man. He's a servant, a slave to the empire now. And it makes you think, doesn't have 1 Corinthians, right? This is the passage we love to skip over sometimes. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 26, for consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise, according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. Who's that? Who's the foolish ones? Yeah, see, that's every one of you, okay? Yeah, me too. Okay. All right. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he might nullify the things that are, so that no man can boast before God. Right? There's Daniel, exile, slave to the kingdom, right? Daniel, who would have every reason, wouldn't he, to carry a chip on his shoulder, right? Don't you think you and I might, right? Captured, friends, family, probably, died, deported to a country we never wanted to live in, right? Given a position we never wanted, forced to learn things that we never wanted to know or to be a part of, and to become a counselor to a king that has destroyed my community and my culture and my way of life. Do you think I'd have a chip on my shoulder? Right? Daniel doesn't. Daniel's a humble man. He's a humble man, and here he is doing his best to serve the needs of the king, and by that, the needs of those around him, his countrymen, right? Because this is under the sovereign hand of God, where God has placed him, and he's responding to it, and he's doing what God is allowing him to do. He's a humble man, all right? He's a humble man, but he's God's man. So when he goes before the king, he says to me, the king says, can you make known the dream to me? And Daniel says, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners, no man is able to determine this, but there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he has made known to Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. And so he's God's man. He's not his own man, he's God's man. He's pointing to God, and he's pointing to the glory of God. He'll say in verse 30, as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom in me, more than any other, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. And so this is your opportunity, Nebuchadnezzar. I've been given the wisdom from God, right? And it's for the purpose of making known, verse 30, to the king, God's revelation to you. So you never know when your opportunity comes to share God's truth with others. And they don't always know when the opportunities come for God's truth to be shared with them. But Daniel's letting them know this is your opportunity, right? Now, what is he making known to them? And this will move us into the statue. This is the part, this is why you're here, right? We want to talk about the statue, okay? All right. So verse 28, there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he's made known to the king what will take place in the latter days. What will take place in the latter days? Now that is a phrase that apparently, the best we can understand, that every time it is used in the sense of the consummation of the promise of the Messiah and his coming. Old Testament, New Testament, that when you find it, this has to do with the coming of the Messiah. And so Nebuchadnezzar's question, what's going to happen in the future? How does it affect me? God is telling you what's going to happen in the latter days. And you get to then verse 31 down to 35, and you get the statue. What is the statue like? It's a great statue, right? It's a single great statue. It's a statue that's large. The word there is, it's large. All right, it's really big. All right, but it means very large. It's a very large statue. It is a splendid statue. The word, it's brilliant. It's been made excellently. It's shiny. We're about to find out it's made of metals. Metals have what we call luster. Right? They're able to shine. So it's a splendid statue. And the size and the splendor of the statue together make it an awesome statue. It's of extraordinary splendor, and its appearance was awesome. It was awe-inspiring. All right, and we know that they had the capability to make these kinds of things. Some I ran across this week that apparently there is a bronzed statue head, okay, that's been cast. And what's notable about it is it's not just shaped on the outside, but it's been hollow cast. All right, in other words, there's a certain thickness to the metal, and the interior of it's hollow, and it's from around 2000 BC. Well, we're 1,400 years on past that. All right, and so you might think, could they even make a statue like this? Well, they probably could, from what we know just archaeologically. And so in the dream, and that's important because in chapter 3, he's going to make a statue, right? So he gets influenced by what goes on here, and he's going to make this statue. But a single statue that's large, it's of extraordinary size and splendor. It's made of different metals. The head is of gold. The torso and arms are of silver. The belly and the upper thighs are of bronze. And then the legs are of iron. And then the toes and the feet are of iron. And it says mixed clay, all right, which means a hardened clay, so clay tiles. So it's an iron clay tile mix there, all right. You continued looking at this statue, that's verse 31 to 33 says, until a stone was cut without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay, and it crushed them. So there's a statue, and then there's a stone, and the stone is cut out of a mountain. It's cut without hands. It's thrown at the statue. It strikes its feet, and it crushes them. I don't think I've sat down and really looked at this, but this strikes me that in verse 35 it says the iron and the clay, that's at the feet, and then the bronze and the silver and the gold were all crushed at the same time. All right, and it became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them was found. And so when the statue is struck at its feet by the stone, the whole statue doesn't just merely topple over, but it literally comes asunder, right? At the elemental, at the compound level, the atoms from atom, and it just drifts away like chaff in the wind, and it's absolutely gone, so that not a trace of that statue is left, and that stone then becomes a great mountain filling the whole earth. That's the dream. Now remember, Nebuchadnezzar said, you got to tell me the dream first. All right, there's the dream. Statue, gold, silver, bronze, iron and clay. Stone strikes the statue dissolves, and the stone grows into a mountain filling the whole earth. Is that the right dream, King? Yes, this was the dream. Verse 36, this was the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of the dream. What's the significance of this statue? Verse 37, that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. You, O king, are king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. Now that's significant. You think the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. Does something else from Scripture come to mind? How does the Lord's Prayer end? Thine is the what? The kingdom, and the power, and the glory. For God, forever and ever, right? Now the forever and ever part isn't here, but it's significant. God has, in his sovereignty, chapter 1, verse 2, given Judah over to this king. God has apparently given a lot more than just Judah to this king. He has given kingdom, power, strength, and glory. He's given him a kingdom that measures wherever, verse 38, the sons of men dwell, or the beast of the field, or the birds of the sky. He's given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So he's given Nebuchadnezzar a broad kingdom. Many commentators look at this and say the language does not limit what God's given to Nebuchadnezzar simply to the kingdom that was Babylon. It's as if the whole earth stood out there for him to conquer. He didn't conquer all of it, but it's as if it stands out there for him. Nebuchadnezzar has been put in a place of what we call suzerainty. In other words, when there was a king who had conquered an area, but his home was a long ways off, he would put a vassal king reigning over that area, and he would be a suzerain. He would have all the power and all the glory. and all the wealth and the strength of that king in this place, and it was his place to rule for him. Now, he did it according to his rules and his laws and his decrees, but he rules in this place. And when you go back and you think of creation, that's exactly the place that man was given over creation. God has created all things good, and then he puts man in place over it, and he says, what? You have rule over the birds and the beast and the fish and over all of creation, to subdue it and to rule over it. All right, and you get very similar language here with Nebuchadnezzar. You have been given a great kingdom. If for no other reason, later in this book, this is going to come into play in a very strong manner. But even right here, right, Nebuchadnezzar, you have been given kingdom, power, glory, rule. But before you get too puffed up, too comfortable, right, too cozy, let's see what's coming behind that, right? Before you get too settled in about this and too comfortable about it, you are the head of gold, he says, right? You are the head of gold. But after you, verse 39, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, and then a third kingdom which will rule over all the earth. And then there'll be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. And in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but will have in it the toughness of iron, right? And so your kingdom is not going to last. All right, as great, as grand, as glorious as your kingdom's not going to last. There's going to be a second kingdom, then there's going to be a third kingdom, and then there's going to be a fourth kingdom. And the thrust of the message here for Nebuchadnezzar and for you and I and for anyone else, right? It doesn't matter if you're a monarch, a despot, a president, or if you're just the king of your own castle, right, guys? Okay? All right? All earthly kingdoms, all earthly fiefdoms, they're all passing away. Every one of them. There's this kingdom, then there's that one, and then there's that one, and there's that one, and ultimately, right, there's the stone that comes and strikes all of it, and it all dissolves, and it's as if it never even existed. And that stone becomes a mountain and an everlasting kingdom. And your kingdom is no more, right? Right? Do we have a tendency, right, people, men, guys, maybe especially, but all of us, to be building, right, in this world and building our hopes, our dreams, our kingdoms, right, and lay our heads down at night like Nebuchadnezzar and be worried about the future and be worried about that which I've been building and be worried about that which I've been pouring into, whether that's my company or the organization or the church or my children or my grandchildren and their futures, right? Do we have a tendency, right, to worry about the future of our kingdoms and forget sometimes that a kingdom is coming that will blow them all away? I marvel at Daniel. Can you imagine being Daniel? You've got the dream, you've got the vision and its interpretation, and you're going to go stand in front of a king who rules the earth, ostensibly, and you're going to tell him, hey, you're going to lose it, and there's nothing you can do about it. I feel real comfortable right now. All right, about as comfortable as some of y'all with that yellow jacket buzzing your head back there. All right, somebody kill that thing when you get a chance. I might get a chance. Things you do in church. See? There we go. I'll get him. You know what the awesome thing is? We're family, we can do that stuff, all right? See? Okay, where was I? Let me find it. See? No more distractions for y'all right there in the middle rows, okay? All right? Now, I marvel at Daniel, right? I marvel at Daniel who can go in front of the sovereign suzerain of the earth and can tell him, your kingdom is falling. There's nothing you can do to keep it. There's nothing you can do to maintain it. As hard as you try to grasp onto it, it's going to slip through your fingers and you're going to be usurped. It's nothing abnormal. The one that follows you, it'll happen to them, and then it'll happen to another one, and it'll happen to another one. And one day, God's kingdom is coming, and it will usurp all of them. And isn't that the point, pretty much, right, of Scripture? Right? If there's something that we have to tell people, right, isn't it that? Right? Isn't it that we were created under the rule and the reign of God, and we were happy and we were blessed? And we were most happy and most blessed until we rejected God's reign and rule. And ever since then, whether it's been monarchies, whether it's been despotism, whether it's been communism or oligarchies, or whether it's been democracy, right? We have been about setting up our kingdoms, right? What's the form or the format of God's kingdom? It's what we call theocracy, right? God is the king and he reigns and his people worship and follow him. Anything else is a step in between that, because we have made something of our own on this earth, because sin has entered in. And Christ comes, the stone that cut without hands, and he strikes it, and it is falling down. Now there's a big discussion. Does that mean the first coming of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus? I say yes. Okay. Yes. All right. In that, I don't think you can stop it at the first coming, because what is being described here has not happened, right? The kingdoms of man have not been obliterated, blown away, and the kingdom of God is fully established upon the earth and is everlasting, and it's not going anywhere else, and it's not going to be left to another people, as he says here. So it has to go at least to and encompass all of history up until the coming again of Christ. But when Christ came, he began, right? He inaugurated, we use the word, he inaugurated his kingdom. The offer was made, there are some that have accepted, and now we have a people, right, being gathered in until the fullness of the times of the Gentiles, and they're gathered in, God is waiting, and one day Christ comes. And so there is a day coming where all of this comes to an end. And that's the message we have to tell people. I was reading a blog spot this week. Is by a guy out of Ireland. Mez McConnell is his name. And he grew up in projects, what we would call projects. So call them something a little different there. He said, he was urging us not to shirk, not to fall away, not to be nervous about being bold about the message and encompassing history in it. He said, someone came and they stood in front of me and handed me a tract, and they said this, that God created you, that you rejected God, that Christ came to save you, that Christ is coming back again, and one day there'll be an eternal kingdom, and you can know whether or not you'll be a part of it. And he said, I told him to get out of my face. All right. He said, but it wasn't just a couple of years later. As the story often goes, he may have had the same tract they handed him that day, thinking over what they told him, and he put his faith and his trust in Jesus Christ. And so here's the message. Your kingdom is passing away. Now I want to just throw a couple more things at you about this statue, because I think it's rich. Commentators agree as we look at the statue. All right, and that's the message. The kingdoms are falling away. The kingdom of God is coming. There's an end day coming that will be eternal. As commentators are pretty agreed as we look at the statue, we look at the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, that we're looking at the empires of Babylon, and then Persia, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. So gold is Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, and that's Babylon. And then silver is the Medo-Persian Empire. And then bronze is the Greek Empire that under Alexander the Great. And then the iron at the bottom, that is Rome. And then the iron mixed with clay is something that extends itself into the future all the way up until the time that Christ returns. What we do a lot of times is focus on the diversity of the statue, the gold, silver, bronze, the iron. But here there's a focus on the unity of the statue. You, O King, were looking in verse 31, and there was a single great statue right? And as you move down the statue, the elements of the statue change, right? We get a significance of different kingdoms there, but there's not just the diversity, there's a unity to it. This is a single great statue about what? Not just kingdoms, but about these kingdoms being successive orders of what? The kingdom of man. All right? This is the successive orders of the kingdom of man. As much as we like to say this was Greece and that is Rome and they're all together different, this puts the presentation that it's really just successive differences of the same thing. It's one thing all together. As each empire would supplant the other, it would take over its geographical territory, right? Therefore, it would take over its people. But there's even something a little more than that going on in verse 39. He says there will become another kingdom after yours, and he says what? That it's inferior to you. That it's inferior to you. Now, some want to look at that and say, well, that word just simply means lower, and so we're looking lower on the statue, or we're looking farther down history. But because we've got gold and silver and bronze and iron and clay, right, and you watch a lowering of the preciousness of the metals as you work your way down the statue. I think there's a little more than just lower on the statue going on. He's saying there's an inferiority to the kingdom that will follow yours. And as we look at the statue and go down it, there's a degradation, there's a decay, there's a de-evolution, as it were, in each successive kingdom. And so the question becomes, in what manner is there a devolution from kingdom to kingdom to kingdom to kingdom? And I think it's this. It's not simply, right, it can't be in terms of size for them. Okay, it can't be in terms of size, because Babylon to Persia, Persia was exceedingly great. And then to Greece, Greece was exceedingly great. And then to Rome, and Rome was even greater. And so there's actually an increase in terms of territory. So it can't be in terms of territory. It's not in terms of richness, because each successive empire was more rich and more powerful. And the most common thing, and I think this is getting somewhere close to it, about what this points to, is that as you go from empire to empire to empire, there's an increase, a heavy increase in vice, right? And sin present in that culture. The things that they entertain themselves with and the things that they do, there's a loss of virtues from one empire to the next to the next. And with that, there's a change of philosophy, right? And this is how this always works. That as the ideas of the day change, right, how people live change. Have we seen that in the last 100 years? Right? As the ideas of the day change, the way people live changes. And so you're looking at the head of gold is the king, it's Nebuchadnezzar, but everyone understands it's more than just the king, it's the kingdom. If it's the kingdom, it's the people. If it's the people, it's the culture. If it's the culture, it's the philosophy. If it's the philosophy, it's everything else. Right? It's everything else, okay? It's art and sciences and architecture and ideas, and it's all of it. And so there's a devolution from Babylon to Rome, okay? Why? Because as Babylon is conquered by Persia, they just assimilate the people. If you assimilate the people, you assimilate the ideas and the culture. Greece assimilates the people and the cultures of Persia. Rome assimilates Greece and its culture and its ideas, to the point which by the time you get to Rome, there's been such an assimilation of people, cultures, and ideas that they're not mixing well together. All right? And that's what's being driven at by the toes and the clay. Verse 41, where he says, you saw the feet and toes, partly clay, partly iron. It's a divided kingdom, but it'll have in it the toughness of iron. Right? That verse 43, that you see that it's mixed with common clay, that they'll combine with one another in the seed of men. Okay? That image apparently goes back to Leviticus 19:19, not to sow a field with mixed seed. Okay? All right, so this to be sure, is talking about marriage and those kinds of things, but it's even more than that. It's the cultures that mix, and ultimately they don't mix. And they're part of one thing, but with discrete positions staked out within the culture and the society. Do we see that today? Been watching any debates of late? Right? These folks and these folks, they don't agree. It might as well be iron and clay. Okay? And that's where it was by the time of Rome. It was a mixed culture with a mixture of ideologies. It was a melting pot of nations. And the carrot that it dangled out in front of everybody was citizenship and opportunity. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. That sounds real familiar. That sounds a lot like today. Right? And here's why. All right, just real quickly, bear with me on this, okay? When we study our culture, where does it start? Where do we go back to, anybody? Rome, right? Maybe to Greece, but we talk about Greco-Roman culture, and then we flip that to Western culture, which is our culture, and the study of our ideas and our thinking goes back to them. And the categories that we think in goes back to them. You know what the amazing thing to me is? Science goes back to them, art goes back to them, literature goes back to them, philosophy goes back to them. As much as we try to demonize Rome, disparage Rome, distance ourselves from Rome, if you look at our culture, all right, and you go back to them, they were on the cusp of an industrial revolution. Did you know that? Anyone know that? They literally were on the cusp of an industrial revolution. They were then where we got back to in the 1800s. They had all the parts and pieces. All they needed was someone to see that and that and that. And they had a steam engine. That's where they were. And God went, no. Why? Because Jesus comes, okay? Jesus comes to end all kingdoms, and God pushes the pause button for the Gentiles to be gathered until Jesus would come back. Okay? And so the Dark Ages was the loss of all of that. Any science textbook you pick up goes back to a Greek guy or a Roman guy. Any philosophy thing you pick up goes back to a Greek guy or a Roman guy. Art, architecture, it all goes back to a Greek guy and a Roman guy. Our culture today is merely an extension of the culture of their day, right? So the feet and the toes have extended themselves in Western culture even to our day, and it's all coming to an end, right? God will set up a kingdom, verse 44, that will never be destroyed. It's eternal. It will not be left for another. It will crush and put to an end all these kingdoms, and it will endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw the stone cut out of the mountain, that's Jesus. He's from the mountain of God, the same essence of God, without hands, and it crushes all of these, and they go away, right? That's the import. That's our message. The king kills Daniel. No. You'd think he would. He falls on his face. He does homage to Daniel, gives orders to give him an offering and a fragrant incense. Your God is a God and a Lord of the kings and a revealer of mysteries. Since you've been able to reveal this mystery, promotes Daniel, makes him ruler over the province of Babylon and his buddies. He allows to be made administrators of the province under Daniel while Daniel was at the king's court. Nebuchadnezzar converted. No, he didn't. All right? Don't mistake that. He's a God of gods, not the God. All right? He's a Lord or a king, a Lord of kings, of which I'm the king. Okay? And a revealer of mysteries. I need him on my side. All right? This is not a conversion as much as we want it to be one, because you're not converted unless you're confessing God truly and rightly, and you're giving up all that's in this culture, which we know from the rest of the letter, Nebuchadnezzar does not do, okay? So you go and you present the truth, and you look for a right confession, or you keep presenting the truth, right? So does that help you a little bit with the image and the statue, okay? So take these things home with you, wherever God puts you, even if it's before kings and authorities, proclaim the truth. Do it with humility, okay? Tell them the world and its kingdoms are fading away and they'll ultimately pass away, and there's an eternal kingdom coming, right? That it will be everlasting. When it comes for a people, not all people. When those kingdoms are blown away like chaff, there's a lot of people blown away with it. And you're going to need to do more than simply acknowledge the God of the Bible. You're going to need to know him and confess him and give your life to him. All right? And he needs to be yours because you're his, not because you're trying to make him yours.